Hello fellow coding rabbits, and welcome to live coding with RabbitWerks JavaScript. Tonight is episode 4 of the Vue Basics series, and if you tuned in or were waiting last night, I apologize. The YouTube system that they have, oops, not that window. Their live stream thing is just not working out for me very well, and I was having issues connecting. They're like in transition between like their classic and their like new revamped version of their like live stream suite, and it's causing nothing but issues. So hopefully we have no issues tonight. So it looks like everything's going okay for the most part. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of live coding with RabbitWerks JavaScript, and let's say hi to the peeps in the chat. Looks like we got Michael. Michael runs or is a co-host on the HTML All the Things podcast, and if you haven't had a chance to check that out, I definitely recommend checking it out. It's him and so Matt and Mike, not the Matt in the chat, a different Matt, but they are do this awesome podcast where they just talk about all things web development from their perspective of working in their digital dynasty company. So shouts to that, and keep up the good work, guys. Appreciate it. And then Matthew, as always, checking it out. Thanks for tuning in, and without further ado, let's get started. All right, cool. So last week we talked about what was it, the V model. Let me pull this over a little bit. We talked about V-on, V model, and lifecycle hooks. Sorry for scrolling so fast. So this week we're going to take a look at, and the last few episodes we've only been using Vue as a plugin, as like a script plugin. So this week we're going to look at working with the Vue CLI and getting that going. And so, sorry, I'm just losing my train of thought. I'm trying to get this set up. There we go. That's what I wanted. Okay. So, episode 4, the Vue CLI and Project Init overview. So, we're going to take a look at using the command line interface that Vue has available to us to help scaffold out new projects. It speeds up our development time a lot because we can scaffold out, really professional projects and this song, every time it always throws me off. I'll have to take it out of the playlist, I guess, but it basically it shows us an optimal way of building our apps from the start. It gives us kind of a boilerplate on a good Vue.js pattern to start with. So just a little heads up past this point, if you're following along, and we will require Node.js to use the Vue CLI and use all this stuff that we're going to be working with in the next upcoming episodes. So if you don't have Node.js installed on your computer, I'd suggest going to the link, and I can actually just share it in the chat really quick and just plug that in. If for whatever reason you don't have Node installed on your computer yet, which is not a big deal because some of us are just starting out, but this is the next step. So go ahead, install that, and then we can get working with the Vue CLI. So, Vue CLI. So I have a link to the official guide and documentation, and Vue CLI gives us the ability to, it says decrease our development time in here, but it really should say increase or speed up our development time of Vue applications exponentially. And by using the Vue CLI, we gain a number of features that aren't available to us using Vue as a plugin. So a couple of those features would be like, so for instance, like I said, it helps us to easily scaffold out Vue projects with presets. Some of the project defaults we can set for using something like Babel for being able to use ES6 syntax, JavaScript syntax, and having it compiled down to ES5 and run everywhere, run in all the browsers kind of stuff. It also provides ESLint support, so we can actually pick from a couple of default settings that they have, and I usually go with the Airbnb preset because that's what I like to use for ESLint. And also it has CSS preprocessor support as well. So if you want to use something like Sass, Stylus, Less, Post CSS, if I'm forgetting anything, but yeah, you can use all those as well, which makes it very appealing to some people. And yeah, so another thing we get with that is we get the Vue ecosystem resources available to us. So we have a Vue router for setting up routes on our front end applications. We get Vuex state management available to us if we want to bring that in, which is for basically a global state manager. So you'll see when we get into bigger projects how it's best to have Vuex is kind of thought of as Vue applications one source or one true source or one source of truth kind of thing. So having all of our state managed in our Vuex module versus scattered throughout our components makes things just work. Otherwise things will start to fall apart. Also we get TypeScript support, which is cool if you like to use TypeScript. Progressive web app support. So it like gets a service worker and stuff set up for you, kind of like a default setup for that. We also get support for unit testing, which they support Jest and Mocha, and also end-to-end testing. I think you can use Selenium and Nightwatch with it, are two pretty common end-to-end testing suite things. So. Vue is also extendable by plugins, which you can also, excuse me, which you can also look into as well. And when we use the Vue CLI, it's going to give us some built-in command scripts in our package.json, which we'll be able to serve and basically spin up our dev server with our Vue application. And we have our build command, which Vue will compile all of our code down to browser-friendly JavaScript bundles and plug it in to a nice dist folder, and then we can deploy that. So again, another thing with using the Vue CLI and using that for building projects, we get access to the common JS modules syntax as well, so import syntax, which is very helpful. And then we also get full syntax highlighting for Vue, which makes a huge difference. Which is really helpful. So to get started, we need to install the Vue CLI. So let me just kill these terminals really quick, start from scratch. And so whether you use npm or whether you use yarn, it's basically you just got to run the code or the install command for it, and we're just installing we're globally installing the Vue CLI package, and we do that by typing, for this case, npm. We'll say install -g, and that's the global flag for npm, and then we do @vue/CLI, and then when we run that will download and install the most current version of the Vue CLI that is out. And I am going to actually cancel it because I already have it installed, so we won't have to worry about it. But if you run that, and once it's finished, now you can just check and see that it did install correctly by running Vue-v, and that'll give us the version. -V, sorry. So now that we have it installed, let's start a new project. All right, cool. So how do we start a new project? And okay, sorry, just checking the stream status. Okay, so how do we start a new project? Well, we gotta type Vue create, and then we're gonna type in our project name. So we can just say hello world. We'll just do the typical example for this scenario. So Vue create hello world, and it's got to be all lowercase, and it has to be hyphen delimited. Otherwise it'll kick back. So the next thing it brings us to, as you can see here, let me just bring up the font size a little bit so everybody can read it. Sorry if it was a little small at first. Looks like Joshua has made it in the chat. So hello Joshua, it's great to see you, or see your message, I guess. Happy you made it. Hope your day is going well. Okay, so this Vue CLI screen, this is where we can set up our presets that we have. So you can see basically it has a default that it comes with, and then I have my own basic template with vuejs and the Babel and then Airbnb ESLint configuration. So we can either select a default, and that will give us Babel and ESLint. Otherwise, we can go through and manually select the features and just use the up, down arrow keys and the enter button and stuff. So if we hit enter on menu selection, you'll see what we can get. The next screen that it brings us, it says check the features needed for your project. Use space to select, A to toggle all, or I to invert selection. So we can see it has two settings already picked for us by default, Babel and linter and formatter, so ESLint. And most of the time, most of the time what I will use personally is I will sometimes, depending on what I'm building, bring in a router, but I'll more than likely always bring in vuex. But we won't do that tonight, since that's a little bit out of the scope for this episode. But you can see that it does have, the TypeScript support, PWA support, CSS preprocessors, which we can go and pick from, and then like the end-to-end and unit testing and stuff. So you can see if I want to choose Babel, choose the linter, and just hit enter, and then it's going to ask me, since I have the linter, it's going to select it. It's going to ask me what kind of configuration I want to use. So if I was going to do a CSS preprocessor, it would say the same thing. It would ask me in a similar screen what CSS preprocessor do I want to use. So you can see there's a couple of options that they have. They have prettier, ESLint and prettier, ESLint standard config, ESLint Airbnb config, and then ESLint with error prevention only. And I know I just went through that list backwards, but that's all right. So I just like to use the Airbnb config because that seems to be most succinct with my coding style. Yeah, so that's what I use. And then you can see it'll say lint on save and then lint and fix on commit. You can either choose both of them. I usually just do the lint on save because I don't want it to change any of my code necessarily. So I'll go through and fix the linting errors manually instead of having it do it automatically. And that's just personal preference. You can set it up however you want it. So we have that, and then the next thing it's going to ask us is for if we want to set up our config files, if we want to have that in our package.json or in dedicated config files. Most of the time you'll want to just do it in the package.json file because you won't even need to really, unless you're customizing like a couple of different ESLint rules and stuff like that, you won't really need to worry about the configuration for these unless you're at the point where you want to configure it specifically to cater to your needs for the project or whatever. So in that case, it might be easier to break everything out into dedicated config files, but for our cases tonight, it's kind of overkill and it'll just end up cluttering our tree a little bit. So let me just close out these folders really quick. Okay. Alright, so we are in, where are we in? We are in the Vue Basics folder. So this, when we're finished running this, it should generate a new folder for us called Hello World, and with our Vue app boilerplate essentially generated inside of it. Okay, so we'll just keep it in the package.json. We're not going to save it for a future project because I already have it saved, I guess. And you can save it if you want, or if you have a preset that you have set up and you want to save it, go ahead and do that. And it's going to do its thing, and it's going to initialize a new project for us. Excellent. And then Vue also has a GUI available to start new projects as well. And sometimes if you aren't the most comfortable working in CLI yet, then that's totally cool. I do recommend that you give it your best shot working in the CLI in addition to using the GUI if you want. This is just saying that my node modules are too long. So once it generates a git ignore file, that shouldn't be an issue anymore. But so yeah, definitely give it your best shot with the Vue CLI. It's not too complicated. I mean, really all you gotta do is just run this Vue create project and just install the package with npm. So like, I feel like you could do it. I have faith in you all. But if you want to check out the GUI, we can totally do that too. So let me just bring up a new terminal while that's doing its thing, and we can actually run the GUI by just typing Vue UI like that, and it's going to start it. And let me bring it over here. All right, here. So this is the Vue CLI GUI, essentially, or Vue GUI for building new projects. So I don't know, if we wanted to do new project, we could add create and tell it where. Looks like the folder. I don't really use this, so I'm not really sure what the UI is all 100%. I mean, we can go and figure it out, but it just gives you kind of like, you know, it gives you a UI for the project and stuff. So you can bring in CLI service, so that's for like the Webpack server or whatever that runs underneath all of it to like spin up our DevPack server. A bunch of stuff that's over the scope of this stuff. Don't worry about it. But if you want to check out this UI, I definitely recommend taking a look at it, if nothing else, because it does kind of give you an idea of what all you have in your projects and stuff. You can also import projects into it as well, install dependencies and whatnot. So that's pretty neat. They got the serve, build, lint, and inspect. Looks like it would be the equivalents of the CLI commands. So cool. I don't know. Neat. Okay. Kill this terminal. Looks like our project is done scaffolding out. So now it looks like it tells us what we do next is cd into hello world. So that's the new directory that it created for us. And all right, so cd hello world and tab to autocomplete it. And so now we are in hello world. And if we open it up, we'll see our new project file. So what I'm actually gonna do, we'll just keep it in here, that's fine. Okay, so everything in between this folder here and this is all of our new Vue project that we just got generated for us via the Vue CLI. And we can take a look at it a little bit closer. So typical folder structure, or folder that you'll see for using npm node, the node modules folder, and that's grayed out because it is in fact in our git ignore. So yeah, so it generates a git ignore file with all of the basic or typical files that you would want to ignore. Neat. Okay. So we got the node modules folder. That's cool. We got this public folder, and if we take a look inside of the public folder, we can see that it just, let me scroll down here to the right spot. We got the index.html, so this is going to be our app entry point. This is going to be the HTML file that gets served to the client when they go to the web address or whatever that has our app running on it. So this index.html file will be loaded, and when we build our application, it'll generate a new folder in this public directory, and it'll generate a new dist folder in the public directory, and then that's the folder that, and then we'll just pretty much deploy this public folder, and that will contain all of our project files ready to be released. So cool. So yeah, there's not much going on here. It just has a no script tag in case JavaScript is not enabled, and then our div with the ID of app, and that is our entry point for Vue.js. And let me see, looks like there's a couple people chatting in the chat. They're just talking about the GUI. He was wondering, Michael was wondering if anybody uses it, and Joshua says that he uses it to save from repeating commands and stuff. And yeah, I don't know, I could see where it'd be useful. I don't generate enough Vue projects to, I guess, have to do that, but you know what? There's always a first, right? But I think keeping track of it kind of like an archive would be really nice to have everything in there. If I had all of the Vue projects in there that are in existence on my machine or whatever, then being able to have a visual GUI reference to all those different projects and then what's going on in them would be very helpful. So cool tool. All right, so let's move on to the next thing. So where are we at here? This keeps going to the top. Okay, so Vue.js overview via the Vue CLI. Developing in this workflow also allows us to build much larger and more complex applications by creating modularity, reusability, and optimization. So if we want, right now that we have our project up and built, we can actually spin up our dev server and see what it has generated for us. And so when we cd into our project like we already have, we can actually just run npm run serve, if I can type, and it'll spin up our dev server. It's going to build all our modules out. It's basically building our bundles, but it's not really bundling it, it's just kind of building it, compiling our code, so to speak, and then spinning up a server and loading it to that server. So if it doesn't load up automatically, you can go ahead and click this IP address or the local host port 8080, and that's just the default that it loads to. And let's take a look at this app. All right, so voila, the Vue.js hello world. I guess this is it. This is all she can do. So I hope you like Vue, and I will see you next time. I gotcha. Just kidding. Not doing that. Anyways, that's the Hello World app. It's not very all that flashy or special, but it kind of gives us an example of just the quick, rapid prototyping that you can do just by simply installing and just making a couple changes to some files here and there, and then you got like this application. So it's pretty neat. So yeah, so we talked about the node modules. Oh yeah, so you can see it has a couple of different config files in here. So it has our Babel config file, editor config. This is just kind of like, what did I say? Just kind of like configuration files for the project and whatnot. So if you wanted to make any changes in like Babel and stuff like that, this is where you would do it. I thought that was going to store it in the package JSON, but I guess I just put ESLint in there. So yeah, we got this, our typical package JSON, package lock.json. If you've ever used anything with npm before, you're familiar with these files. It's just basically keeps track of all of our dependencies and at what point they are or what version they're at, sorry. And then we have just those scripts. So the npm run build, run serve, and run lint. You can see they're just aliases for Vue CLI service, serve, and so it's just easier to type out. And that's the package.json that we get when we generate a new file or new project. Just scroll down again because it keeps going back up. All right, so then if you use yarn, you'll get a yarn lock file instead of a package lock. And That's all there is to that. All right, so the next folder, this is the main folder that houses our application. This is where we're going to do all of our work at. So the source folder, and that's typically where all of applications in development will be held. So there's a couple things in here. We got our assets folder, we got a components folder, we have an app.vue file, and we have a main.js file. So what the heck is an app.vue file? I don't know, we'll come back to it. But basically, so it generates a folder, we have our assets, and this is where we're going to store any of our static assets such as CSS files, images, custom fonts, datasets, like hard-coded datasets. Anything that's like kind of a static asset is going to go and live in the assets folder. And then usually you would like break it out into subfolders to kind of keep things organized. So you'd have like an image folder, CSS folder, and whatnot. Even though when working with Vue we get CSS in our single file components, which we will talk about in a little bit, there's also in my opinion, a good pattern of design or development is to have your global CSS styles in kind of like a main.css folder or file, and have that imported into the application as a whole. Kind of like to register those classes globally instead of doing it in a single component. And there's like caveats with like components and CSS and stuff like that too that we can talk about when we get further into like looking at a single file component. But so just for as kind of like a rule of thumb, if you have any type of like any type of framework or CSS library that you're using, external library that you're using, and you just have like the file and it's not like pulled in through a package manager or anything like that, this would be the place to put it, or any type of like global styles or anything like that, and like a main.css kind of thing. So that's basically the assets folder. The next folder we get is a components folder, and contains our Vue components. And so right now we just have a hello world.vue again, whatever that means, but we will have many components in our projects, so further scaffolding of the folders of the component folder structure is recommended over keeping everything at the top level. So like if you look, I have another example here of like a typical structure, folder structure. So like you would have like a nav bar, so to speak, and then that nav bar would have a component, a nav bar brand component, and a nav bar item component. And so each of those folders has their own Vue file associated with them as well. So navbar brand, navbar item. I think that Vue recommends just doing Pascal case without the underscores, but I like to do the underscores sometimes because it helps to kind of keep separate it more so than just like a capital letter. But personal preference, really, it doesn't make a difference, to be honest. Follow them if you want, follow whoever you want, just make sure it works and you can read it and it makes sense. Alright, so that's kind of like an overview, like a component folder structure and whatnot. And again, we'll come back to components in just a minute here, so don't go anywhere. But first, we got to look at our app.vue file and our main.js. So I think we'll look at the main.js first. Let's open this bad boy up. So you can see there's not much going on in here, but I'm going to split this actually. There we go. Bring this down. Okay, so there's not too much going on in here. Basically what this is doing is it's just creating a new Vue instance, and it's taking it's importing our app from app.vue, so this file right here. It's plugging that into the argument of Vue's render function, and then it's rendering that Vue instance. It's mounting it to our div with the ID of app. So in our HTML file right here, or index.html file, it's gonna mount that in this div right here. So That's the main.js, and if you have any like global view configuration or any type of global view variables or view declarations to make, so to speak, so if you wanted to like make a global directive or a global mixin or component or anything like that, you would do it in here and then export it as well. Or you wouldn't need to export it. You should just be able, as long as it's declared in here, you should be able to just use it globally throughout any of the Vue components. Don't quote me on that because I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works. I don't ever usually do global declarations like that with Vue. I haven't really needed to. So if I'm incorrect, it's all good. Okay, so let's see, where are we at? So so like I said, the Main.js is the main connection point between the app.vue file and the index.html, and then verbatim what I just said, I guess. All right, so but it's still getting this app.vue file, and we don't know exactly what that is yet. So let's take a look and see exactly what this Vue file looks like. All right. Let's make this out. Alright, so a breakdown of Vue single file components, and then there's like a link I have here shared as well as in the description to Introduction to Vue Single File Components if you want to take a look at that. That's actually just the Vue.js's guide on it, so go ahead and take a look at that. You might learn a little bit more. And basically, Vue single file components are, or this .vue file, our special custom file types built for Vue that we can build our components and keep everything contained inside each Vue file. When we build apps, we usually have a feature, a main component for that feature, which we can contain any number of child components inside of it, and they're all Vue components. There's no distinction to them other than their DOM hierarchy. The only difference is the app.vue file versus like component files, because the app.vue file gets mounted with the render function into our application. So that's the only that's kind of like our root Vue component, so to speak, if you want to think about it like that. All right, so there's three parts in here. We got a template, that's like our markup. We have a script, and we have our style tag. So kind of like a mini web page in a sense, but this is where we have to really be careful. So if you're coming into Vue.js or reactive kind of frameworks in general, from something like traditional like static built web pages and whatnot, or maybe like server-side PHP pages and web apps and whatnot, there's this whole concept of the separation of concerns. So let's see. Actually, I want to pull up a picture of it. So separation of concerns. Separation of concerns. Okay. Let's see what this says. Oh yeah, this was a really good one. I liked this is I saw this in a talk that I think Evan, you did for Vue.js. So basically, there's the separation of concerns, how we used to. On the left is how we've been doing things for years and years and years, and how we've been trained to do it, and how everybody's been like, best practices, don't do anything but this kind of thing. And on the right of this image, you can see that everything is kind of blended together. It's separation of concerns, only from a different point of view. So what it's saying in a nutshell, let's just bring this over here so I can look at that, and I want to close this stuff really quick. Basically, in a nutshell, it's saying that traditionally we're thought of keeping our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript separate from each other and in their own files. With reactive frameworks and the increasing complexity of apps being developed, this is not that practical of approach anymore, because we have huge maintainability issues when we have to try and work in reactive frameworks and and Vue and whatnot. So Vue makes it really easy to be able to shift our thinking from separating the languages over to separating the components. So the if that doesn't make sense, we'll look at this image again. And you can see that it says we have a button, a date picker, a modal, a list item, a media item. All of these things have their own JavaScript, they have their own CSS, and they have their own HTML or template tags. In this case, it is HTML, but it's inside of a template block or whatever, according to Vue. So, looking at that picture and now taking what we know about the separation of concerns and how we need to shift our thinking and start to like unlearn what we've learned about the separation of concerns. So, how do we go about doing that? Well, let's take a look again at this app.vue file and see what's really going on with the separation of concerns. So we have, this needs to go down one more time. So we have three parts: our template, our script, and our style. And this is specific to this component and nothing more. So we have in the template, this is where our markup goes. So you can see it has just a div with the ID of app, and this is going to be different because if I remember, or if I recall correctly, I think that this div becomes like really literally gets injected in place of this div right here. So, but I could be wrong on that. I'm pretty sure that's how it works, but anyways. So we have our markup, and we have this div, and we have an image, and we have this weird HTML custom element thing going on that says hello world. And that is a component, sorry. That is a component. And you can see that in our script tag, if we look at it, this is actually, so the scripts tag, we have our component, that hello world component, being imported in from the common JS modules. So this hello world component in our components folder is being imported into our app.vue file as a child component. So now let's take a look. So inside of a Vue file, inside of the script folder, this export default, this whole code block right here, that is our Vue instance, or so to speak. So this is where we're gonna have, let's take a look. So if you look at the markdown file, you can see that inside of this export default object, it's going to have a number of different properties and objects associated inside of it that are our Vue instance. So we can have you can see we have a name, which isn't really necessary, to be honest. But usually what I start out with is a data property or a data object. And so this is when I was saying before in our last couple episodes when we talked about the data object and whatnot, is that when we're using Vue as a full-on application like this, and we have multiple components, we need to data needs to be a function that returns an object, a new object kind of thing. Otherwise, if we have multiple instances of this component, then it they're kind of all linked. All that data is essentially linked. It's all sharing that same data object. So if you change one on one component, it's going to change on the rest of them. So that's why we really need to return a new essentially separated object that is specific to the component or the Vue instance that it is part of. I know that might not make a whole lot of sense. I can try and demonstrate it, what I'm talking about. The Vue website or Vue Docs has a really good demo on it too. Excuse me. So data is a function that returns a new object. So inside of here is where we would put our properties. So like something like name, and be like Sean, and age should be. This always makes me think of Futurama, where he goes, Bender calls, goes to collect call, and he goes, "I'm not giving my name to a machine." And he's a machine, so it's just funny. I don't know. And this can actually just be a number. So we have our data object, and we have some properties in our data object. So cool. Neato Toledo. So in here we can also put our methods object, our computed properties, our watch object, and then we can also hook into any of the lifecycle hooks that Vue has available to us that this specific Vue instance will go through in the application. So each Vue instance has its own set of lifecycle hooks specific to that Vue instance. So just something to keep in mind about that. So like basically if you write like this, for example, this will only console log when this Vue instance is created, not if instance B is created, kind of thing. So how are we doing on time? 43? Okay, cool. Let us see. All right, so yeah, we talked about how the Vue instance is. That's basically this export default object is our Vue instance. Sorry. And don't worry, we'll come back to these crucial aspects of Vue very soon. Oh, sorry. The new thing that is the two new objects on here that we probably haven't seen yet, or that we haven't really looked at much yet, is the actual components object and our props object as well. So components and props we will come back to in depth, not this week, but we'll start talking about those in depth next week, in the relationship between parent and child components with props and data passing and all that stuff. So but for now, we just know that components are essentially our custom elements, our reusable custom elements that we create, our Vue instances that we import into other Vue instances and build up off of together, kind of like Lego, or kind of like Legos, you know, each component is its own Lego piece and you put it together and build off of each other, and they are reusable, so you could use this component here and that component there, and I mean they're as reusable as you code them to be, so they can be as unreusable or as reusable as you can possibly make them. It's all about the code that's written inside of it, essentially. And then if we had props, so we wouldn't have props on this, but if we were passing in, okay, so you can see this right here, message equals welcome to your Vue.js app. This is a prop, all right? So it's a custom attribute that's basically sending some sort of data to that component to be used as a prop inside of that Vue instance. So you can see that it's just has this it's just message and it equals hello or welcome to your Vue.js app, right? Pretty straightforward. So that's a prop. And then if we look at the hello world, this mangled unordered list stuff that they have going on, you can see down here it says props. We have message props object on this Vue instance, so this export default Vue instance, and again it has the name in there, but that's not required. That they have the props object here, and they are doing a little bit of prop validation, which we'll talk about too as well when we talk about it. So they're just they have a prop for message, and they're saying that it's going to be a string. And so the way props work, they kind of work in a similar way as data properties work on Vue instances, as in the fact that we can plug that into our template, our Vue instance, with string interpolation, or like we can loop through it and anything. It's basically kind of treats it as a read-only data property, and you can't change props values and stuff. I mean, you can, but it won't reflect in the app after the page reloads or whatever, because it's just a read-only data property essentially at this point. Again, we'll talk about components and props and the relationship between the parent and child components and whatnot a little more in depth next week, but for now, I think that kind of gives you a basic overview. So you can see right at the top here, H1, it's being passed in as message. So let's see, where is our app really quick? I just want to show some neat stuff. We haven't really done a lot of coding yet, so just talking a lot, going through the basics. So you can see if I go into my app.vue file and I actually take this out, I'm just going to delete it for now. And then components can be self-closing, which is nice. They don't need a secondary closing tag or whatever to function. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that message variable inside of my data object here, and we're just going to say RabbitWerks rules. Yeah, that's going to work. And then we'll just comment that. And so now with that message in here, we can pass that message down to our hello world component as a prop really quick. Just do message equals, what we have to do is bind to message. And it's the same name as, we have to have it set up in the same name on our props object that we have it passed in as right here. And we bind to it, and then we just set it to the value we want, so message, just like that. And without any issues, if we bring up the thing, it should say RabbitWerks rules. Woo! Okay, cool. So you can see that it works, and it just like you can update it and stuff. It's kind of neat. So that's kind of just a scratch in the surface example of components and props and whatnot. So cool beans. But yeah, I'm not trying to go too far into that right now because it is not necessarily in this scope. Okay, speaking of scope, we're gonna move to the next block of our Vue instance, or our .vue file, and that is the style block. So this is where we write our CSS or any type of like pre-processed CSS languages in here. So excuse me. So you can see right here, it's got just it's targeting the app, or the element with the ID of app. I can never say that right. Okay, so and it's just sending some basic styles and whatnot. So this is good and fine, and each component has its own style block in it, and so it kind of just acts as like little snippets of like CSS that are right there in reference to the component and whatnot. But the really cool thing about using style tags in Vue.js in Vue's components is the ability to get truly scoped CSS. So this is really, really cool because you can see that. Let's pull up if we so right now, okay, so basically for right now, this app, this ID app rule or whatever is a global is a global style right now, because it's just essentially if we were to have everything broken out into our main.css file and everything was a global style and whatnot. So it'd just be like working with CSS as you normally would, and it would be just as tricky and namespace collision-y as it would normally be. But the thing with Vue is that when we use the scoped attribute in our style tag, such as that, we get the component CSS to be scoped to whatever is in our component and nothing else. So it doesn't go to anything else. If we had, okay, so let's see if we can demonstrate this a little bit. I'm not sure actually about that div ID app thing replacing it. I'm not sure how that works. That'd be interesting to find out, because I feel like that would cause issues. Anyways, I'm just lost in thought, sorry. Hello world. So so sick of seeing this. I'm just going to delete this unordered lists here, and say we had this div was the class of, or we gave this div an ID. Actually, you know what? Let's see. Better way to demonstrate this is actually, so we see this div has a class of hello, and right now, so this one, these styles in here are scoped, and we don't need any of those because we deleted all that stuff anyways. So everything inside of this style code or style block is scoped to this component. So if we have something like .class, and we'll say something ridiculous like background color, and we'll just set it to blanched almond. No, not that. I like the dark slate gray or whatever. That's nice. Okay, we'll do it that. And we will change the color of the font. Oops. To, I don't know, let's just do something random maybe. A nice green color. That works. Cool. Alright, so let's look at our app here and see what we got. So div class. Oh, it's because it's not .class. I'm silly. It's hello. Class of hello, not class of class. So now if we go back into our file, you can see that it has all this stuff in there right there. Cool. So it has that, and if we were to, okay, so right now this is scoped, and if we go back into our app.vue file and we say something like give this div an ID or a class, that same class equals hello. Okay, so we have that, and if we look at this thing, you can see that nothing has changed, and that's because the hello world component, those styles are scoped, right? But let's see, I'm just gonna close this out really quick and bring up, oh, not that, I didn't want to do that. There we go. Sorry, where's my mouse? There it is. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay, so we have this going now, and if we go back into our hello world component and we delete this scoped attribute, you'll see what happens. You can see that the background color changed, and that style got applied to this component's div because it has the same class. And if we are to scope it again, so scoped, you can see that it doesn't get applied anymore because this hello class is scoped to this component. So anything inside of this component with that class will be affected, but anything outside of it will not be, which makes it super helpful when you're working on components and stuff, because like, especially if you're working on like a component, like if you're on a team and you're just working on a component, like you don't have to worry about like namespace collisions with your class names and stuff. You don't have to worry about like what this guy named or this gal named her classes and this guy named his classes, and like have this like giant massive swimming pool of ridiculously verbose and confusing class names because they're all in one, you know, essentially one namespace universe or whatever you would call that. I don't know. Space of namespaces and space. I don't know. Anyways, so you can see that the scoped attribute really helps to, you know, like it says, limits the CSS to this component only. So it makes it incredibly helpful to do it. Use that. And if we had something like the same class, but see, okay, so like this one is, you know, not scoped. And kind of like a rule of thumb, what I like to do is that, oh, you could see sometimes that happens when you make changes to Vue's styles and stuff like that. Like when you add the scoped attribute, sometimes you have to refresh the app for the styles to regenerate and be applied. So that's something, just, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's a Webpack thing or if that's a Vue thing, but Anyways, okay, so where are we at? We talked about that and styles and scoped and all that stuff. Let's see, let me pull up a markdown file, open the preview, scroll down, talked about all that stuff, and oh yeah, so in the styles style block or whatever, if we are using like a CSS preprocessor language such as like, you know, Sass or whatever, then we would do add the lang attribute, and it's just what you want to have it say. So it'd be like Sass, like that, and then you can use Sass in here, like just like that. But if you do this, you see that it's failing to compile because it doesn't have the Sass loader in there. You would need to go in and install that via Vue through like their CLI, and there's like, if you look at the Vue CLI documentation, it tells you how to do that fairly easily. I'm not sure exactly because I honestly don't use preprocessor languages, especially with CSS variables being supported nowadays in the browser. Yeah, so speaking of CSS variables, I guess we should probably talk about that. Let's see, let's open up our assets folder. We can add a new file and we'll just call it main.css, right? Cool. So we got this main.css file, and let's just give ourselves a little bit of default styling. So we can just say all elements, margin 0, padding 0, and box sizing, it will be border box. Just some pretty default basic styles that we get. Nothing's taking effect right now because we actually do need to import this main.css file into our app, our Vue app. So to do that, we can go, this is the easiest way that I found to do it, in my opinion. So I go to the app.vue file, and where is it? Right above all of our styles. I think it's right here if I remember correctly. Sorry, I'm drawing a blank. Import, no. Right here, of course. Let's see. So right at the top of our script tag, that's where I will bring in the shared styles, or like the global styles or style sheets that I have set up in my assets folder. So so we'll say import. Oh wait, I'm sorry, that's why I was confused. To import the CSS, it's not in our script tag, obviously it's in our style tag, but we need to use the @import keyword, right? Just like that. So the @ and then import, not just import by itself. So import, and then we just give it the path to the file name. So assets and main.css, just like that. And cool. And with the refresh, you can see our global styles have been applied. We have no more margin on our boxes, and everything is border box sizing. It's a little bit different looking. So just to demonstrate that, I can come in here and add to the HTML, target the HTML tag, and we're just going to put a font size FSZ for the shorthand, hit enter, and let's see how 20 pixels looks. Bump it up just a little bit. I don't know. We could try and say 30 pixels, and then that looks alright, I guess. I don't know. Nothing looks alright. But the point is that we have these classes now that we can target, and larger font, and just say font size is 1.5 rem, just like that. And if we come into our hello world component and give this random element, so in this case this p tag, we'll give it the class of larger font, and You can see that right there, it gets applied just like it would normally. It's just like working with regular CSS. So you just got to import it into our topmost, our root Vue component, which is the app.vue. That's the easiest way that I've found that works to get access to it anywhere throughout the app. And that way it's not, you don't have a bunch of global styles taking up space inside of your app.vue style block either. So some tips and tricks on that. And I think, okay, so there's one more thing I wanted to talk about when working with templates and stuff like that in Vue.js. So let us see here. We can come into our app.vue, and okay, so with right now, as of Vue 2.6.5 or whatever it's at right now, 2.7, 2.6.7, something like that. As of right now, Vue.js in our template block does not support multiple root level elements or root level components or nodes or whatever. So the root level being the first element after inside of this template tag. So in this case, in this component, the root element is the div ID of app, and this hello component, hello world component is the div with the class of hello. And so what it's saying is that we can't use multiple root elements in a Vue instance, and it'll actually break. So if I try to put in this div right here, it's going to give me an error, and it's saying right here, component template should contain exactly one root element. If using v-if on multiple elements, use v-else-if to chain them instead. So yeah, a couple of things you can't use. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to use something like a v4 on this because it'll render out multiple elements in the root level. You can use a v-if. So we can actually show that really quick and just type in something like shown up, just like that. Alright, so it's still in red, but if we apply our v-if directive and say v-if equals 1, just to make sure it's true, or evaluates to a truthy value, and then we just do the v-else directive on this one, it should work. So right now we see this, and if we change this to 0, we should see our other one shown up. Cool. And that's basically a little bit of a workaround. But in Vue 3.0, so the next major release of Vue coming up, I think it's going to be August. I'm not 100% sure. Don't quote me on that, but it's going to be relatively soon. I know they're working really hard on it, and it seems super awesome. Vue Mastery YouTube channel just released like 9 or 10 different videos from the VueConf US talks and stuff that happened not too long ago, and there was a ton of cool stuff coming forth for Vue in the near future, so super stoked on that. And so let's just bring this back really quick. I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about tonight. Let me just double check, go back down to the bottom here. Yeah, okay, so next week we're going to talk more, like I was saying, we're going to really jump into like the components and props and like the parent and child relationship that is shared between them, and like passing data, working with data in Vue. We'll like make a little simple app just to get something up and running, so it's not just this like atrocious like whatever you would call that markup going on just for exemplary things. So we can put like something, just make like a little to-do app, I guess. We could do that really quick, but I really want to just kind of talk about working with data inside of components and props, because I know that when I first started, I was just like, oh, well, we pass it with components, pass data through components as props, and then we just send any changes back up via like a custom event. And Vue has these things called custom events and stuff that basically proxy events, or you can create your own custom events to fire off and emit and be listened for and all that stuff. which is, on one hand, it's super cool, but on the other hand, if not used correctly and responsibly, you will have a maintainability nightmare and have no idea why things are changing and where they're changing and what from and why and when. And basically your app will probably just fall apart if you overuse custom events as like the main transportation for data and stuff like that. Because that happened to me with if any of you saw the Tasker app series, you could see that I used custom events like crazy, and it ended up coming to bite me in the butt, because it got to the point where it was just so unmaintainable, and I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know where it was happening from. And because you don't really get any information when using custom events, you really lose track of where things are happening. So if you are looking at custom events in some way, shape, or form, which I know that we haven't talked about at all on this series, but I would just be wary and use them responsibly and sparingly. Don't do it. Don't use, if you find that you need to use custom events to like manipulate data on a parent component from a child component, then just use Vuex. I mean, it takes an hour to learn or something like that, and then you have like legit state management that is like immutable and whatnot. See, the thing with Vue.js is, I don't know if we have talked about it that much in general, but the thing with Vue.js is that this data object is not, it's mutable data, so we can change it, right? Whereas React and stuff like that, their data is all like immutable. You can only change it by returning a copy of the updated data object or whatever. Whereas with Vue, we're actually directly changing the values of our data. So to get around that, which really gives Vue a lot of the flexibility that it has, being able to work with stuff and the reactivity side of things inside of Vue applications, but it also can create some issues with the fact that it is mutable data, and that it is mutable data, and it's just like, and so like when you use Vuex, when you extract all of your data out into the Vuex store and keep it track and like the one true source of truth in your application, then that's where that immutability comes in, because you start to use the Vuex Vuex APIs and whatnot to properly update and return and change data, manipulate data and whatnot in your application. So we'll talk about Vuex coming up soon, not now, not next week either. So I think that is going to do it, because we're just about a minute and 10 in. So yeah, again, make sure to go check out the HTML All the Things podcast. I will have the link in the description for that. If it's not already, I will have it in there. You can check their podcast out on any of the major, podcast suppliers. I listen to it on Spotify, which seems to be the easiest, but I know that they're on a ton of different services. So if you just Google them, you'll be able to find them, no problem. HTML, All the Things. And again, RabbitWerks viewers and stuff, if you want to check out devlife.com, that is DVLFE.com. It's developer related clothing and stuff like that. I don't know, it's pretty high quality stuff. You can get 25% off your purchases if you use the coupon code RabbitWerks at checkout. So if you want to check that out, go ahead and do that. I know that Craig over there would really appreciate it. He's looking to get this new online store up and off the ground and rolling. So anything we can do to help was awesome. And of course, thank you to everybody who tuned in today. I hope that you learned a lot, and if you have any questions, of course, the repo and everything by episode per episode is available on GitHub, and I just revamped or reorganized the whole structure so it's a little bit easier to follow along from the beginning, a little bit more organized. So feel free to check that out. And if you have any questions at all about this, you can leave a comment in the description or down below, or you can hit me up on the RabbitWerks Discord server, which the link is in the description for too. And other than that, I think that should do it. So if you liked this, give it a like, shoot a comment, subscribe, hit the like button again, hit it a bunch of times. Hit it, whatever you do, hit it an odd amount of times so it stays liked. If that makes sense. You know what I mean? Get it? So, and I just, thanks everybody for tuning in to the chat. It's cool to see people starting to communicate in there, and it means a lot. So, thank you and have a great weekend, everybody. And until next time, keep coding and stay awesome. This has been Sean with RabbitWerks JavaScript, and we will catch you next time. Have a good weekend.